Hello and welcome to the Jazz Jam Podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Gunnels, joined by my co-host, Max Levy. And on today's episode, we are going to be getting into a landmark, unique recording by none other than John Coltrane. And this recording is his only Blue Note recording that he ever did as a leader. So super excited to get into this one. This episode is on the album Blue Train by John Coltrane and Company. And yeah, it's going to be a good one. I'm super excited. I think this is the first time we've featured Coltrane exclusively on the podcast. I know some people are probably livid about that. It's hard to get to everything, so we're getting around to it. We're going to cover all of our bases. Max, how are you feeling about today's episode?
I feel like a lot of listeners are saying, thank God they've finally done some Train. You know, that's one of the names we haven't really gone over too much in depth. So we're going to get into his history. You know, there's a lot to say about this album. There's some great musical moments in this record. It's a very unique record in that it's probably, you know, suffice it to say, some of Blue Note's best recordings ever in the history of the Blue Note catalog. I think that's safe to say.
Yeah, and it's definitely just a landmark record. It's a record that people know outside of jazz. Like when people know John Coltrane, this is a record that people might think of. So it's really important in the history of jazz.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this might be most people's first Blue Note album that they buy. You know, it's a handful of a few. This would be one of them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So all right, let's get into the episode. Before we get into the album itself, we want to go over a couple things. We want to just let everyone know, if you like what we're doing, please rate and like us on whatever platform you're listening to us on. And we're going to read a listener review that we got, and we're going to feature some of these reviews from time to time. So if you do leave a review, we'll read them on the podcast. So here's a review that we got. This is from Laura in Connecticut on Apple Podcasts. Laura said, loads of insight, 5 stars. I just came upon this podcast fairly recently. There's a wealth of information here for those of us who need to learn more about how tunes are constructed and how the artist conceived of them. Both Dwayne and Max are so knowledgeable. Excellent job. Keep it up. Thank you so much, Laura. That's awesome to hear that. We're glad that you're getting something out of the podcast. That's why we do it. I mean, when we had this idea, we were like, no one's doing this. No one's like going through albums this, you know, track by track and really breaking it down. And so we felt like it was important for, you know, to kind of explain the history of the albums and break it down musically. So thank you so much. The reviews are awesome, and it's good to get that feedback so, you know, we can keep giving the listeners what they want.
That's right. Please leave more reviews. We'll give you a shout out. We'll give you some praise. Any sort of feedback is really appreciated. And thank you for listening. And please share about it, like and subscribe wherever you listen, Pandora, Spotify, Apple. And now, you know, we're doing quite a few stuff on YouTube too. So check that out.
Yeah, definitely more excited to get more into YouTube. If you have any recommendations, we've been doing some like reaction videos on YouTube. So if you have a recommendation for a video you'd like us to react to, please feel free to send that into us. You can email it to us at thejazzjampodcast@gmail.com or send it into our website through the inbox there. We'd love to hear what you have that you want us to react to. That'd be really cool. And then we're going to do another little segment that we're going to start featuring, and this is the Jazz Jam Recommends section. Max, we're just going to recommend anything. It could be random. It could be a book we've read. It could be jazz related. It could be non-jazz related. It could be anything. An album that we've listened to recently, whether it's jazz or not. Max, what do we have for this episode's Jazz Jam Recommends?
Well, since we're starting this out, you know, fresh off the start with Blue Train by Coltrane, I wanted to recommend a video on YouTube from a guy that goes by the name Jazz Shepherd, the Jazz Shepherd on YouTube. And he has a cool video, and you shared this with me. So really this comes from you. So kudos to you, Dwayne, for finding this video, finding this cat. He's a really interesting guy. He sort of, if you take a glance at him, he doesn't look like a jazz guy, right? He's kind of, he had, cut off sleeves, long hair, He looked more like a rocker or
Yeah.
punk guy.
That's
you
what
know?
I thought. It's like, what's this metal cat doing talking about jazz? But then I started listening to the video. I looked it up just because I wanted to get some history, right? So I look it up on YouTube, and I'm just like, wow, this dude has a lot of valuable insight and context. So I sent it to Max, and yeah, he kills it.
Yeah, so that's called A History of John Coltrane's Blue Train in honor of the Tone Poet release. So the Tone Poet series from Blue Note, they do a lot of reissues. So that's the context of why he did that video. But that's from the Jazz Shepherd. He gives a lot of great context about this album, the historical context of what's going on in the country. The state of jazz at this time. This was recorded in 57, released in 1958. There's a lot of interesting things and both historically in society and the culture and in the world of jazz happening at the same time. And it's sort of a precursor to the civil rights era. And so he goes over that, and he gives a lot of great points that I wasn't really expecting him to give, and really interesting video. So check that out from the Jazz Shepherd on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll definitely be looking at his channel more as we continue to do the podcast and seeing if he's, made videos on things that we're doing, because it was definitely a great resource, and we love the history aspect of things. So I'll link that video in the description. So if you're interested in going to watch that video, just click on the description. It'll be linked in there. And speaking of the history, Max, do you want to tell us about the history of this album, kind of where it was recorded, how it was recorded, the personnel?
Yeah, let's get into it. Like I said, it was recorded in 1957, right on September 17th, 1957, at the Rudy Van Gelder studio in Hackensack, New Jersey, for Blue Note Records. It was released in early 1958, January 1958, and recorded during Train's tenure while he was at the 5 spot with the great Thelonious Monk. Another thing about Blue Note Records, especially at this time, was that Blue Note would pay the musicians on the album, whatever album they were producing, to rehearse the music prior to the recording date. And that was a rarity compared to many other labels, especially if you compare Blue Note to Prestige. Prestige didn't really pay their musicians to rehearse, but there were great records that were produced and great music that came out of Prestige. And some of that is my favorite format for jazz recording is the Prestige label. But Blue Note would actually pay their musicians to rehearse and go over the music, and you can kind of tell that with this album. They're really clean. You could tell it's well arranged, well thought out. Most of the compositions on this album are originals from John Coltrane. The only standard prior to the album's release is I'm Old Fashioned, which is a ballad. And in general, Train at this time starts to use conventional harmonic and compositional practices in slightly unconventional ways. He's steeped in hard bop right at this moment, but Coltrane, you can hear, is moving towards his ultimate sound and approach on this record, where he will eventually go with albums like Giant Steps. This is an original pressing. I just saw an original pressing that sold on eBay not too long ago of this record, Blue Train, and it sold for $12,600. Dwayne, would you cough that up?
No way. I can't believe that someone paid that much. I don't know if it was a promotional copy. I haven't looked at, but that is insane. I mean, I know that the original pressings from Blue Note go for thousands typically, but that is an insane amount for a record.
Yeah. I think they started the bidding around 3,000, and it got to $12,000. So that speaks volumes to how adored this album is, how much people love it, and how monumental it is in the presence of the Blue Note catalog and in Train's career. This is sort of his first great record. Before this, he was on Prestige. He had some decent albums. He was on some stuff as a sideman. He did Sonny Rollins' Tender Madness with Sonny, and he was on Griffin's A Blow-In Session record that features Johnny Griffin, John Coltrane, and Hank Mobley. And quite frankly, Johnny Griffin wipes the floor with all of them. But that's like just before Train becomes really Train. And so this is that first moment in his recording history where that happens. And I would say this is some of the most hardest swinging Train on record. All in all, really clean album. And like you mentioned, it's Train's only Blue Note record as a leader.
Yeah, it feels like this album really kind of opens the door to Train's sound and the records that are going to come after. It feels like this is him starting to open the door to, you know, the way that he plays the sheets of sound, the way that he approaches harmonies and compositions. And so it feels like this is like him just starting to open up to that, and it's really awesome to hear. And it's so interesting hearing it in the hard bop Blue Note kind of context. It's just a really unique album.
That's right. That's well put. That's exactly what we're getting here with Blue Train. It's like a moment in history, a specific snapshot in time of where jazz was progressing and where Train really sort of came out of, and his sort of concept started to be solidified at this time at the release of this record.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, let's do some history on John Coltrane, the musician himself. We haven't really dug into his bio, so we're going to skim through some of the highlights here. His full name, John William Coltrane, born in Hamlet, North Carolina, and Dwayne is sitting in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of great people from the Carolinas.
Yeah, and if you drive from Wilmington to Charlotte, which is, you know, one of the biggest cities in North Carolina, Hamlet is on 74, the highway that goes through there. And you would miss it if you blinked. It is not a big town in North Carolina. So very humble beginnings for Coltrane.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. On September 23rd, 1926 was when John Coltrane was born. He grew up in High Point, North Carolina. Where is that?
That's up near the Greensboro, Winston-Salem area. More Winston-Salem, but there's more going on in High Point than there is in Hamlet. I'll tell you that much.
I bet. He... growing up, he played clarinet and euphonium before switching to the saxophone. Dwayne, you played euphonium.
Yes, sir. Yeah. That's the key to being great, I suppose.
Well, a lot of connections here. He wanted to switch to saxophone after hearing the great Lester Young and Johnny Hodges. I mean, I don't blame him. They'll get you. In 1938, his father, his aunt, his grandparents all passed away within that year. I mean, that's devastating. And that kind of led him to be raised by only his mother, you know, as a single mother. And at age 17, his family had moved to Philadelphia, where he started taking saxophone lessons, and he did some light gigging in the Philly area. He was really motivated after hearing the great Charlie Arbor Parker play in 1945, which was right before Train enlisted into the Navy. And it was sort of a fail-safe move because at that time we were at the tail end of World War II. He did not want to be drafted into the Army. So he said, you know what? I'll just go ahead, bite the bullet, and join the Navy. He played with the military band called the Melody Masters. He was treated as a special guest due to the color barrier at that time. You know, were steeped in segregation. And so as a way to get around some of the regulations that were occurring about racial barriers in institutions, they had to treat Train as a special guest instead of as an official member of the band. So, you know, we're going to come across these stories. It's really sad.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Well, there it is. So, you know, he won in the end. But anyway, after that, he was discharged in 1946. He returned to a bustling scene in Philly. He used the GI Bill to study music theory in college, and he played with cats like King Colax and eventually switched from the alto to the tenor sax when he was playing with Eddie Cleanhead Vinson. The Philadelphia-based pianist Hassan Ali as well was a major influence on Train, who helped him with harmony and other major musical concepts. He was sort of taking lessons and just raking in knowledge and experiences at this time in Philly. He started to practice a ton at this point, with numerous stories saying that Train would practice until he fell asleep with the horn still in his mouth. I got to try that sometime.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You're not going hard enough. You're not shedding hard enough unless you fall asleep and you're just like, oh man, what was I playing again?
Wait, what was that like?
Yeah.
He would often just practice fingerings also if there were noise complaints. If he was on the road with a band and he was in a hotel room and the neighbors complained, he would just practice fingerings and not really play much of a sound, but he would still practice. And that's how dedicated he was to this music. And while Train was freelancing in Philly, he received a call from the great Miles Davis in 1955. He started playing with Miles, recording with Miles his first great quintet, worked with Monk in 57. After recording Blue Train, this album we're talking about, he joined Miles' sextet and was on the great album Kind of Blue. He had developed a newer way of playing. He was incorporating what we now call the sheets of sound approach. He developed his own harmonic approach with tunes like Giant Steps, and that approach would be called Coltrane changes, as we refer to them now, and that's what is taught in a lot of jazz schools across the country. He then formed his own first quartet with the great McCoy Tyner on piano, Steve Davis on bass, drummer Elvin Jones. Doesn't get better than that. His My Favorite Things recording was during this period too, with him starting to incorporate the soprano saxophone as well. And by 61, Train was getting experimental and using cats like Eric Dolphy, bassist Reggie Workman, Jimmy Garrison, other bass players too, recording tunes with two basses on them. And he was really experimenting with instrumentation and compositions and all things music. Train always had other destinations in his mind from where he was at any given moment. And this is where some critics and audiences start to dislike Coltrane. It is rumored that he was booed sometimes when he was touring with Miles overseas at this time. In addition to his more experimental playing, he would record some more straight ahead things. He did an album of ballads with Johnny Hartman, another great record with Duke Ellington, and he had some commercial success with that. In December 1964, Train's classic quartet recorded A Love Supreme, which I believe is their best-selling record other than maybe My Favorite Things. A Love Supreme we may get into at some point. Four-part suite. It's really a culmination of all his work. It's an ode to his faith. And this is the later period of Train where he gets into more free jazz. He's inspired by cats like Albert Ayler. He's using multiphonics, overtones, altissimo, and he adds Pharoah Sanders into his group. He brings the group sound to the edge of the galaxy, as Gary Giddens once called it. And it was in 1966 that McCoy Tyner had left the band. So he started to lose even his own band members at this time in his musical journey. And, some people became just disgruntled a little bit with where Train was going. He started to use Alice Coltrane in his band, his wife, and performances would often include 15-minute long solos. Some may argue I've done that a time or two. I don't know.
I don't know about 15 minutes, but, it's all about how it feels,
Yeah, whatever you feel in the moment. So Train was feeling a lot. Let's just say that. Some of those final recordings he did before his death include large free jazz compositions where it was just, almost cacophony at times. And then there's an interesting record with just saxophone and drums called Interstellar Space. That's something you should check out. Maybe not more than a couple times if you want to keep your head straight. Train would also tour up until about 2 months before his death. He unfortunately died of liver cancer at the age of 40 on July 17th, 1967. So he only lived to be 40 years old. At different times in his career, he was addicted to heroin. He had drank a lot more at an earlier point in his career, and it just sort of caught up to him. Overall, Train was a really spiritual cat. He was into world music and the world's religions. He was always searching for something new and searching for truth. And that really explains Train, the musician, and Train, the person. Always looking for the next thing.
Yeah, I think those are great points. One thing that's interesting about spirituality is I heard a quote one time and someone asked him if he believed in God, and he said he believes in all the gods. So I think just very spiritual, and kind of a lot of his music comes across that way for sure.
Yeah, and another thing is there is a petition or a move to try and get his home. It's either in Long Island, somewhere outside New York. Philly.
Yeah,
They're
I've
trying to
walked
get it.
past it before.
Okay. Aren't they trying to get his home into a museum?
Yes, yeah. So it's like not. It was being like maintained by his family or maybe some local society, but there's nothing. It's just like sitting there. So there is an effort to have it like restored and become a museum, which would be super awesome. It's not in the greatest part of Philly. It's also not in the worst part. It's near Sedgley Park, which is a cool park. But yeah, that'd be cool. I've walked past it before, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. That's John Coltrane's house. It just looks like a old house that might fall apart soon. So hopefully they do that.
That's right. There's also the Church of John Coltrane, the Church of St. John Coltrane, where they sort of used Train's later recordings as a spiritual guide and influence as a way to worship. It's like they use Train as a vessel towards a spiritual type of worship. So that's interesting too.
Yeah, and I think he was canonized by some kind of church, like maybe Zion Church. I know he got canonized, so he is Saint John Coltrane now, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
I don't know which denomination it was, but yeah, so definitely a lot of spiritual connections within John Coltrane's music and his life and his legacy.
Yeah. Dwayne, you want to tell us who else is on this album?
Yeah, I mean, we get a killer crew on this album. We get young and up-and-coming horn section at the time. Coltrane himself is young and up-and-coming, but we also get two Blue Note cats who are also featured on the album, Curtis Fuller and Lee Morgan, who Lee Morgan is potentially one, like, the greatest Blue Note artist of all time. I mean, you got to think about Art Blakey as well. But yeah, Curtis Fuller on trombone, Lee Morgan on trumpet. They're young, they're energetic, and they're just so damn good. And we're gonna get that over and over on this album. So that's the horn section here, and then the rhythm section is just, I mean, it's insane. We get Kenny Drew on piano, who, in my opinion, one of the more underrated pianists that we get in jazz. He gets kind of lost in the sauce a little bit because he moves to Europe, but then there's so many cool recordings and things that happen in Europe, and Kenny Drew is on all of them. I just found a video of Hank Mobley playing live. It's on YouTube. It's like one of the only videos, I think, of Hank Mobley playing live, and he's playing softly maybe, or
no, he's doing Summertime.
Summertime, that's what it is. And Kenny Drew is on piano on that, and it's killing. Yeah, it is Summertime. That's a crazy cool video. So Kenny Drew, maybe a little underappreciated, but a killer cat. Kind of reminds me of Wynton Kelly at times with his style. Very blues and hard bop oriented, and it's a great fit in the group here. And then we get the ever fantastic, one of the greatest of all time, Paul Chambers on the bass, and then another all-time great, Philly Joe Jones on the drums. So this rhythm section is just insane, and the horn section's insane. So I mean, it's no wonder that this album is what it is with this group. It's just such a good cast for this album.
Yeah, this album is stacked, as they would say.
Yeah. All-star lineup for sure. I mean, I can't think of one that we've done there's a couple, you think of something like Something Else that has, a lot of those killer cats on it. But this is up there with it. So yeah, that's the crew that we've got. Let's get into the album so we can start talking about these guys and their playing. What do you think, Max?
I'm down. They start off nice and hot and almost eerie sounding. This title track starts off the album, that's tune called Blue Train. It's a 12-bar blues, John Coltrane original. It hints at minor blues, but it's not a minor blues. It's still major blues, but they add that sharp 9 to those dominant 7th chords during the melody. And the solos are definitely over the major typical 12-bar blues form. And we're in the key of E flat, concert E flat. I tend to think the head implies that minor sound a little bit more than, the theory geniuses would say. It sort of sounds eerie and minor, but all they're doing is still sort of dominant 7th chords, adding in that sharp 9, which sounds like the flat 3. It's basically the flat 3, which is a dominant tone in the minor sound. So they're playing around with that. The rhythm section hits off the head and makes that head speak with its use of longer notes as well. I want us to listen to the melody a little bit and get a sense of this iconic head that starts off the album. And then that second time, it sort of layers, right? And the horns come out with a little more harmony on the repeat of the melody. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's just so well arranged, and that's something we're going to get a lot is you can tell that this is really well rehearsed. And I think later on, in like new releases of the album, they put out like some of the alternate takes, and like one of them's like alternate take number 9. So it's like obvious that this is like really well rehearsed, and they were like really trying to find the perfect take. So yeah, everything here is going to be crisp and clean.
That's right. Train enters with his solo after the head that's played 2 times, while revolving his ideas around the 9 or the 2, if you want to think about it that way, which propels him into a really swinging, really moving solo that combines great lines with longer note arrival points. And keep note of all the times that Philly Joe implies double time during each horn solo. We're going to listen to that during the trombone solo, but not yet. Again, with Train, he gets more melodic around the 3-minute mark during his last chorus. I want us to listen to Train's last time through the form, and I want you to pay attention to those faster lines he's going to end his solo with. I love how he ends his solo.
Yeah.
It's like it's technical, but it's melodic as well.
It's so clean and crisp. It's just like, and the lines are just all so great, and it's just like starting to really feel like Train.
Yeah, that's right. And then the next solo is Lee Morgan. He starts off nice and easy on that trumpet, repeating some themes he's made up, and he starts off really cool. And then he hits it into overdrive, playing double time lines with Philly Joe on the drums, doing that almost double time quasi feel underneath the solo, and comes out of that part of the solo screaming into his last chorus. So a great feat from Lee Morgan on this too. And then we get the trombone. Curtis Fuller starts his solo with one of the last ideas that Lee Morgan expressed at the end of his solo. Let's check that out. Yeah.
Yep.
He's sort of passing the baton that we've talked about. Curtis Fuller's lines are so clear and impeccable as he continues his solo. He tends to naturally go from one idea to the next, and I love the way he treats his solo during the implied double time feel Philly Joe gives us. Let's listen to how Fuller treats that section so everyone can get a taste of what Philly Joe is doing and how his playing is contributing to the overall group and the overall sound of each horn solo. Yeah, right there, they're back to the typical swing feel.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think that's the greatest moment of how one of the horn players uses Philly Joe's change and feel most effectively. I think Curtis Fuller really hits it out of the park with how he's playing during that. Very thematic too. He's really playing around with an idea once he plays it, and then he waits a little bit to move on to a different idea. And that's something that's so musically mature that not everyone can do that.
Yeah, and I think that these three horn players, their styles are just all kind of different but complement each other so well. And I think that's what Curtis Fuller brings to this album so well, is like, yeah, a lot of the thematic, like kind of motif playing and like taking an idea and how can I manipulate this idea and use this idea to kind of connect to the next thing. And he uses space really well a lot of times. So I think he's just the perfect addition to Lee and to John on this album.
Yeah, they do complement each other because they'll approach things differently, but in ways that are musically interesting. Like, with this feel here where they do double time, Curtis Fuller doesn't go right into that double time feel when Philly Joe goes there, but Lee Morgan did when he was soloing and right, went right into those faster lines right away. And so there's different things you can learn from listening to these players if you are a player yourself, and how you can approach changes in feel like that, and the transition from straight ahead time to double time. It's like everywhere you listen, there's a lesson in here, and that's another great thing about this album.
Yeah, and it's just like, just two different approaches. It keeps you kind of on your toes. You're like, oh, cool, okay, I like what he's doing there with, like, not going to the double time feel right away. It's not super predictable.
That's right. And don't forget, the rhythm section is spot on too. Not only Philly Joe, but Paul Chambers is locked in with Philly Joe on that feel. The bass has got to be there too. And bass is the beat, and the drums accentuate the beat or make the beat come out more. So that's got to be locked and loaded and played together. And they do that really well. So check out those moments in those horn solos when that happens. Kenny Drew is also grooving hard on his solo on the piano. He reminds me a bit of what you'd get into if you combined Wynton Kelly with Red Garland, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, awesome lines during his double time section too. Even Paul Chambers gets a solo on this. Great to hear a bass solo. It's a nice 2-chorus ride with just drums backing him up. No piano or horn pads. They really let Paul Chambers open up. It works to add a change in texture and weight in the music. There's great lines with moments of clear language here from Paul Chambers. He's also plucking like a typical bass player would, using what we call pizzicato, as opposed to what we normally expect from Paul Chambers, where he uses the bow. He will use the bow later on in the record, but not here on Blue Train.
Yeah, I have one thing I want to say about Kenny Drew's solo. I love his blues playing, kind of reminiscent of Wynton Kelly, like you said. And one thing that I think he does really well is incorporating the halftime feel and the double time feel into that double time section of the solo. It's not like how Curtis Fuller just kind of starts out with the halftime over double time. He kind of will incorporate it in and like mix it in between. Like he'll play like a halftime blues lick and then go back into the double time feel, and I think he just kind of really mixes it in super well, and the feel is just incredible from Kenny Drew.
The ideas are endless, and we haven't even talked about the rest of the album, but you get that right away from these cats, and that's a great point about Kenny Drew. He is severely underrated, and every time I listen to this album you realize that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So another lesson there. They do the head back at the end 2 times. They do come in with the head again, ending with a longer note and nice extended cymbal playing from Philly Joe. All in all, stellar, superb track. It will forever be a classic recording. Even if we just think about this tune in particular, this is one of those that everyone recognizes.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of sticks out to me about this tune is like it's not the most complex tune or complicated thing, but it just really allows these players to shine, and like we're getting that right off the bat. We're just getting a feel of like what's gonna come the entire album, like this really like in your face hard bop approach and just killer solos, and everyone's going to take solos, and that's going to happen throughout the album. Everyone's going to get some. It's kind of the Blue Note way. I mean, we hear it with Blakey all the time, like Moanin', we get that track, and like everyone's going to solo, and it's just super awesome to get to hear everyone on this track, and just a great way to start the album.
And I hate to say it, but it is exceedingly refreshing to revisit this album because you're right. It embraces the jazz solo in a way that a lot of modern, recordings don't necessarily. And so this is sort of what you get if you get, 6 awesome, superb players by themselves, and then you put them together. And this is the magic that you get.
Yeah, and I think one thing that it serves to do, and we kind of talked about this, is when everyone gets to solo, you get to hear the way that everyone's interpreting the changes, the melody, the song itself, right? So we get to hear the way that each one of these fantastic musicians is going to approach the song. And when it's not, that's how when you only get one solo, you might just get one person's perspective. But I think it's really cool here to get everyone's kind of take on what's going on, and we get it right off the bat.
That's well said. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything else because that was better than anything I could come up with.
Thanks, Max. Every once in a while, I think it's something that's valuable.
Yeah, you hit it.
Yeah.
All right, with that, we do get the next track on the album called Moment's Notice, which is another one most jazz musicians know. Dwayne, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, this is a really cool, unique track, and it's just really kind of Coltrane coming into his own compositionally, his writing. And one thing that's interesting about this track is he never recorded this track again after this version on Blue Train. This is the only recording that Train did of this. Other soloists have treated it as a standard, particularly since the 70s. So modern guys, it gets called all the time, and it's now considered a standard. So super unique song. It has a unique form, which you might expect from Train, but maybe not at this time, right? So he's starting to innovate. It's kind of an A and then an A prime with a really cool tag on the A prime section with a break at the end, which I really like. And it's unique changes here from Train as well. Lots of 2/5 movement, but moving quickly and not in the most conventional way. So it's not, necessarily, I think it's moving more chromatically than your typical 2/5 movement that might be a 2/5, 2 to the 5, and then, moving kind of in the circle of fourths and fifths. That way, this isn't what Train does. He uses 2/5 movement, but does it in a different way, and we're really starting to get his feel for, that kind of approach to music. And I love the intro and the melody on this tune. And that's one thing that I think Train does really well, is he takes kind of compositions that are like interesting and changes that are like unconventional and maybe challenging, and writes really kind of just catchy melodies over them, like ones that are really singable over changes that are maybe not the most simple things. So I think that's one really cool thing that Train does. And Train takes the first solo on this one, and he absolutely blows it out of the water. His ability to play through the changes is just always so incredible and seamless. I want to take a listen to his last chorus because it really stuck out to me there. Just his ability to just play through the changes and highlight the changes. So let's listen to that on Moment's Notice. Yep. Yeah, and you got to hear that ending that I was talking about. That kind of they're kind of pedaling on one note and moving through some chords, and then the break at the end. I think that's a really cool compositional aspect of this tune. Yeah,
the music is seamlessly pouring out of them. There wasn't.
That's I didn't such hear a great way to put it.
I didn't hear a pause in there. There was like moments of breath, but yes. That was it. It's like just enough time to go, and then you're on.
It's like you grabbed a hot pot of John Coltrane and just started pouring it out. That's what we're getting.
Yeah, it's awesome. Great clip on that.
Thanks. Yeah. So that last chorus, that just really stuck with me. And then we get a solo from Curtis Fuller, and he's using more space to start. We're talking about kind of the different approaches, and that's what Curtis Fuller is getting at here. And he has such a nice tone. Like, his tone is like kind of more round and clean than some other trombone players we might listen to, but it's really nice here in this setting. And I really like how he treats the last few bars on the second time through each form. So I want to listen to a quick example, kind of that like ending tag that I was talking about. So let's listen to how Curtis Fuller is approaching that. Yeah. I just like that approach.
There's a little break. He put in a little break.
Yeah. So just a little bit different from the way that Coltrane was approaching it, but still really awesome. And then we get Lee. We're gonna get solos here. So Lee comes in real hot and keeps it right there. That's kind of Lee's approach generally. I mean, he doesn't mess around too much. He's just kind of straight to business, and that's what we get. He's driving through his entire solo. And Lee is just such a treat to listen to. And I'd say this is my favorite solo on the track. It's the language, the way he plays through the changes, the feel. It's just absolutely swinging. This is hard bop. And there's no listening section on this because it would be the entire solo. So just go listen to his entire solo and you'll understand what I'm talking about with those different things from Lee. And then we get, like Max was saying, a bowed bass solo from Paul Chambers. It's carrying on tradition from guys like Slam Stewart, who came before him. And it's just really nice, sensitive comping from Kenny Drew and Philly Joe during this solo. You're understanding the context of what's going on. He's playing with a bow, right? So just really nice comping there, and you can kind of tell how the comping changes when they're playing with Lee then versus playing with Paul.
That's right. And, this is a point I had to make to some students the other day. I got the pleasure of being one amongst many who were involved with judging some high school jazz bands. And, it was an all-day event. And I would ask the rhythm section, what does comping mean? Where does the word comping come from? And they all thought it was from the word composition. But no, it means complement. You got to be complementary. Yep. And when you're complementary to a bass solo, you got to play differently than if you're trying to be complementary to a saxophone solo, a trombone solo, a trumpet solo. And every instrument sort of has their own sort of sound. And how do you complement that as a rhythm section player? And this is a great example of how you would complement a bowed bass solo.
Yeah, and I got one suggestion for that. It's called open your ears. You got to listen to comp,
yeah.
So listening to what's going on and just having that understanding. Yeah, it's a great point, Max. Some people might not. I mean, it's just easy to kind of get lost in, but that's a true musician is one who can understand that and, complement the other musicians around them in that kind of way. And then we get Kenny Drew on the final solo, and he goes for two choruses, a good mix of ideas with bop and blues lines both to show. Just really nice playing from Kenny Drew here. And then I love the melody and how it's so together and clean when everyone is playing together, and how Train kind of opens his tone and sound up a bit when playing alone during the melody. So I think that's really cool. There's parts where he's just playing by himself on the melody, and I think that's really cool. Kind of you have that cleaner approach, and then you have Train just kind of opening up and giving us a little bit more of his personal style, sound, approach. And then really cool, nice 9-chord to end. Typical, just an awesome tune. I mean, it's no wonder it's become a standard. It's a really, really unique, cool tune.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with Moment's Notice. Oh, some people do call it on jam sessions and things like that. So if you're a sax player, you got some homework.
Yeah, you got to learn it because it's not one that you could just sight read and just, you might look like idiot if you're just trying to wing it out there.
Yeah. And then we get, going back to more blues focused composition here with the third track called Locomotion. It begins with an 8-bar drum intro. It's a fast 12-bar blues, but we add an 8-bar bridge. That's a neat technique that players do, but Train does it really well here. It's an AABA with 12-bar A sections, those 12-bar blues sections, and that 8-bar B or bridge section. And we're in the key of B flat. It's a cool head because the horn line lasts just 8 bars of the 12-bar blues form, and Train solos over the remainder of the 4 bars within that 12-bar form. So the main head is just really over the 8 of the 12, and Train fills in the rest. I also like the half-step motion and the harmony on the bridge on those 7th chords. Those are cool. Train takes that first solo. His lines are impeccable. If you thought his lines were impeccable with the last track, it only gets more impeccable as you listen. Here's just a taste. I want us to listen to just a little snippet of Locomotion and listen for the intensity and the sort of specificity of Coltrane's lines.
Max, you know what that sounds like to me?
What's that?
That sounds like a guy who falls asleep with a saxophone in his mouth. That's what that sounds like.
He's so good. That's the only explanation. It's like, he's the guy that falls asleep practicing saxophone.
Yeah, I mean, I want you to listen to that and tell me, point something wrong out, and I'll tell you that you're dumb. I mean, that's all that's all that's happening there. That's insane.
And there's also a sense of purpose and emotion.
Yes.
Which is another great thing about this album. It sort of combines the two super well. Everything's so technical, but it also feels good on the micro and the macro level.
Yeah, he's not just like a bop robot, which you can hear players that kind of sound like that. It's just like lines. He's emotive in the way he's playing. There's thoughts, there's ideas. It's not just like a computer spitting out bebop lines, you know?
That's right. Now, after that sax solo, there's an 8-bar break, and that's where we begin Curtis Fuller's trombone solo. It's kind of interesting to me because Fuller almost implies that he's sort of playing over the first 8 measures of the typical 12-bar blues form, expressing the arrival of the 4 chord in that 5th bar that we would typically expect. But when the band comes in, they clearly are starting at the top of the form. And I was sort of expecting the band to come in maybe that 9th bar of the form where that 2-5 chord progression normally hits, but they just come in at the top. So it's just like 8 bars, you do whatever you want, but I want us to listen to that moment. See if you catch that yourself. I may just be hearing it because that's like what you normally expect in a blues. You just keep that chord progression over and over again in your ear. And it's hard to get that out if you suddenly have a break. But see what you think. Let's check it out together.
Yeah, I'm expecting them to be 4 chord.
Something like that.
Yeah, I'm like in my head, I'm keeping the form, right? Which is what you might expect, but then they come back in and it's on the 1.
And if you listen closely, there's a little bleed in where Paul Chambers is still walking bass the first couple of beats of that 8-bar break. So that's another thing to pay attention to. Now, in general, many of Curtis Fuller's ideas here are similar to ones he used in the Blue Train solo where he was playing, but he just plays them up at a faster tempo. And this is very blues driven. He'll take an idea over 1 chord and play it again in the next chord, but uses the right notes to fit that chord change during the bridge. We've talked about how players tend to do that, and Curtis Fuller does that at moments here during his solo. Lee Morgan also starts off with another 8-bar break during the trumpet solo, like they did in the bone solo. And Morgan's ideas, his lines are also incredibly articulate and really well phrased. Let's check out some Lee Morgan. You won't be disappointed.
Yeah. on fire.
Up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down,
Yeah.
Like that's movement in a solo. I mean, listen, and how seamless it is. So we'll hear more of that later on, but yeah, what you got?
I just think that it's just like listening to this track and the solos, Lee feels like this perfect middleman between Curtis Fuller and Train's kind of style, like mixing the lines and then also like giving us some of the more motif and blues driven stuff. It feels like he's just like this perfect middleman to kind of glue them together.
Yeah, like you said earlier, they all complement each other in a way where they're musically glued to each other, and they're providing one thing at one time, and then the other player provides what was not necessarily missing, but was not emphasized before, and they bring it out in their solo.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So, yeah, just awesome stuff. Great use of language. There's some diminished ideas in there, melodic phrasing from Lee Morgan, and moments of intense blues inflections too, lip falls, grace notes, those sorts of things. And the piano solo has no 8-bar break during its entrance, so it's only a horn solo thing we're getting during locomotion. Great lines from Kenny Drew, bop lines in the right hand with harmonies held out in the left hand. And we finally get a drum solo. It takes up just one whole AABA chorus. I enjoy listening to how he keeps up with the hi-hat on 2 and 4 during most of his solo. Listen for that as we check out some Philly Joe Jones.
Yeah, all over the kit.
That's true. I just find it neat that he kept that hi-hat going during at least the first A or 2A sections. So it's something to check out and listen for yourself. They go back into the head, play it one time through with a really nice slow down, kind of what we call a retardando on those held out chords at the end to end it. I'm stealing some of these compositional ideas from this track. John Coltrane gives me many ideas on this album, and I may be stealing some things.
He almost gives us too many ideas. It's like, all right,
yeah.
All right. No, it's awesome. And there's so many different things, and all the tracks are just so unique. So it's like every track you can take something and be like, okay, locomotion, like this is what I want to learn from this track.
Yeah, absolutely. There's all sorts of moments, and depending on your main instrument, you'll be more geared toward maybe Lee Morgan's solo if you're a trumpet player. But there's always great things you can learn from other instrumentalists. I know I've transcribed some Errol Garner lines, right? I'm, piano player, but I'm a sax player. And you can sort of intermingle where you're transcribing from and what instrument is giving you influence. And ideas are expressed a little differently on different instruments, and you can get more knowledge by learning solos or parts of solos from players on other instruments other than your main instrument.
Yeah, and I know the great Jimmy Smith said he would transcribe saxophone solos all the time. So you get all of that, and it's like, yeah, those ideas are ideas. It doesn't matter if it's a saxophone player playing it or who's playing it. Like those are specific instances of people taking the language and using it in their own style that you can learn from. That's
right. Yeah. And then the 4th track, we actually get a standard. This is the ballad called I'm Old Fashioned. What did you think of this one?
I think it's cool. It's I like how they used a ballad as a standard, using the standard, in the ballad sense here. So this is a cool tune. I really like this song. It was written in 1942, composed by Jerome Kern, who also wrote All the Things You Are, another fantastic tune. And the lyrics were written by Johnny Mercer, and it was written for the film You Were Never Lonelier that came out in 1942. And I think this track just has a really nice intro from Train and from Kenny Drew, just sax and piano here, just and that's a ballad thing to do, but it's really well played there from John and from Kenny. And then we just get a sense of Trane's ballad playing and how unique it is, really. And we're getting to hear the exploration of that sound here from Trane, starting to really come into his own. He mixes in the vibrato and the straighter tone throughout the melody really well. His playing of the melody is just so sensitive, and it feels so endearing. Like, it feels like it's coming from him. It's coming from a place deep inside of him. And we talk about his spirituality, and I really get that from Trane on his ballad playing. I think of ballads like Naima, and it's just like it's coming from somewhere deep inside of Trane, and we're starting to feel that here.
Yeah, that's right.
And then Curtis Fuller actually comes in with the first solo, and he uses melody quotes to start the solo, followed by some good space. He has great use of space throughout the album, but especially here. And then it's interesting listening for Fuller's use of shorter notes towards the end of his solo, whereas you might think of longer, more held out phrases during a ballad. You might be thinking legato, 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 but Curtis is giving us something a little different here, and I thought it was really super interesting and just that super musical, and it gives us something to listen for. So let's listen to how he's using kind of shorter phrasing and articulation here during Old Fashioned. And that final line of his solo is, geez, that's the butter on my biscuits.
It is so swinging.
It's so swinging. And I like, he's kind of mixing in some semi like legato tones, but it's just a lot of like shorter articulation. I just thought that was super fun to listen to from Curtis there.
Yeah, it's beefy, but not in your face. It's got intention and motion and swing. It just felt really good. And sometimes it depends on the player, right, or the context, but it might be a little harder for you if you're a player to swing hard on a ballad, right? I think you become more vulnerable because your feel is really vulnerable. You know, it's like the room is wide open for the notes you're playing and how you're putting them together. So how well do they feel if we're slowing down the tempo like this? And what Curtis Fuller does is spot on.
Yeah, he shows you how well it feels. I mean, especially that last
right.
line. I mean, it's like, can you swing much harder? And then Kenny Drew's solo on this track stands out to me immensely. In my opinion, it is a masterclass solo. He is Oscar Peterson-esque in the way he incorporates the blues while using such a great variety of language as well as some repetition. The solo progresses so well and has such great shape. I just want to start clapping at the end of this solo every time I hear it. It's just a fantastic ballad solo. It's like what Max is talking about. Like how can you express the feel during a ballad? And I think that's something that Kenny Drew does here impeccably. And I was only going to play the second half of the solo, but I think it makes the most sense in all the context. So we're going to take a listen to the whole dang thing. Max, are you ready for all of Kenny Drew's solo here on I'm Old Fashioned?
Now, you do realize we're doing the opposite of what we just said, which is a piano player is really emphatic about a piano player solo. And you're,
I mean,
instead of cross-sectioning, instruments and interest, we're just, you're diving in as a piano player.
You gave me this track and you asked me to break it down. I'd be letting people down if I didn't appreciate this solo for what it is.
All right. Well, I'll let you do it.
All right. Let's take a listen. Let's see if Max agrees with me on this one. So this is all of Kenny Drew's solo on I'm Old Fashioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Come on.
Ah. Watch out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were right.
I mean, and it's just like he doesn't feel the need to just like chop it up, like just get crazy. Like he says so much without ever playing like anything that's like super crazy lines or technical. It's just, I don't know, it feels so good.
And pay attention to the way he ends some of those mini phrases. Da da ba da ba da da. Pause.
Yep.
Right.
Let it breathe.
He didn't go ba da da ba do ba da 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 ba do ba da da ba do dee da da dee da. Right. It was just like it's so perfectly placed and bookmarked in connection to where he's going the next idea. And those breaks in the phrases make or break, that sort of solo like that.
Yeah, and that's the shape of the solo. That's like what Max is getting out there. And it's just like, it's so well shaped. Like, it's just so awesome. And it's just like, he really is kind of going somewhere with it. And it's really beautiful to listen to. So Kenny Drew, I mean, that's just, I love that solo from Kenny Drew. And then, interestingly enough, Lee then takes the head out, which I think brings up an interesting point. It really seems like Train is kind of taking a back seat on this one and letting the rest of the band shine. It really shows Train's trust in the other musicians that he's enlisted to help curate this vision. He's really just kind of handing over the reins and saying, all right, I'll bring us in on this ballad, but you guys go ahead and do the rest. So I think that's awesome from Train. It shows a great leader. He's just leading by example. He's like, all right, I'll get us started and I'm going to trust you guys to do the rest. And I think an interesting side note on this one is that if you're listening with headphones on, you can hear some feedback on some of the high notes in Lee's solo throughout the melody. And I think that might just be like a little bit of a, I don't know if it's like a time, like the time that this is all recorded in an equipment issue, but it's kind of an oopsie in the sound engineer's part, if you ask me, because there definitely is a little bit of feedback there. But all in all, this track is awesome. There's a really nice repeated ending, and it just feels like perfection of a ballad feature, in my opinion. It's awesome. Everyone gets a little taste, and everyone just, their style and approach is so cool, and we get to really hear everyone's different stylistic choices here, which is really cool.
The other thing is there are some interesting quotes in some of these solos on this track. I believe Curtis Fuller quotes the melody to My Funny Valentine during his solo. And you're right, some nice blues playing too from Kenny Drew. It was awesome listening to that solo. And in general, you're spot on. And this is a nice way to feature other members of the ensemble other than Train, even though Train is a leader. And that speaks to Train's overall musicianship and his personhood and the kind of guy he is. I mean, with an all-star cast like this, they're going to put music into music. So wherever you go as a leader, they're going to follow, and it's going to be exceptionally played no matter what you do. But if you give some moments to some of the other players to shine like this, it really brings out the ensemble and what is being provided to a listener audience of whoever is listening to this album. It speaks volumes to the person that John Coltrane was.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I think that encapsulates what we're getting here from this ballad so well.
That's right. And then the fifth track on the album, which is the last tune on the record, is called Lazy Bird. This is an AABA form with a coda, or like an extended last A section. There's a nice 8-bar intro from the piano and the rhythm section before Lee Morgan enters on trumpet. It's interesting here, too, that the trumpet has the head at the top, not Train on the tenor sax. Another moment where we're letting others come out into the forefront of the tune and feature some of the other members on this record really well. I've never been a huge fan of this particular melody. It seems sort of lingering or unfinished, not on the head out, just at the end of the head in. It just sounds that way. That would be my only sort of almost critique of this tune, Lazy Bird. There's also great response hits from the bone and the tenor during the melody on the bridge behind Lee Morgan. There's terrific phrasing and bop lines during the first solo. The solo is very eighth note heavy, great use of enclosures and taking an idea and using it in multiple ways within the same few phrases. Let's listen to that together.
Yeah, some awesome ideas there too.
Right. Well connected. Great phrasing, great playing. After that 2-chorus trumpet solo from Lee, then we get a 2-chorus trombone solo. And Curtis Fuller provides sort of shorter bop lines, great centered tone, and he is immaculately consistent. He's sort of one of the most consistent trombone players I can think of, especially at this time in jazz. So that's another thing to listen for on Lazy Bird. And then we get John Coltrane starting off his solo. He starts with quoting the melody. Great technique. As an improviser, if you're listening, if you're a player yourself, don't forget about the melody when you're soloing, because Train didn't do that, and we all know how great Train is. So let's remember that there's a melody. Don't forget that. In general, John Coltrane is very clean and intentional with his playing. He uses a ton of the middle register of the horn on this one, and he takes 3 choruses. So he does kind of come out and say, hey, I am the leader, and takes that extra chorus on his own tune. So you know, we're not confused about who is leading this record, even though we're featuring other players. And then we get that piano solo, very thematic. He uses some lines reminiscent of Bud Powell to me. And this last track sort of features everybody. And I like that, because after that piano solo, we get a 1-chorus solo from Paul Chambers on bass. And we get the iconic, the quintessential bowed Paul Chambers bass solo. Every album he's on has to have 1 or 2. And we get another one here. Listen to part of this bass solo and how Paul Chambers uses that bow, and just so we can get a taste of what that sounds like and what Paul Chambers is really known for.
Yeah, and I think you can do things in a bass solo, like the articulation that with a bow that you couldn't necessarily do if you're, plucking or fingering it.
Yeah, I guess that's true. There's definitely a change in how you approach the solo. I mean, great players, today that do that are continuing that tradition. But typically, normal bass players just do pizzicato and they're plucking with their fingers. And they don't use the bow as much as maybe other players did in the history of this music. So don't forget about the bow, I might suggest to bass players out there.
Yeah, and Paul, I mean, it was a signature of his and one of the absolute greats. He was not afraid to pull out the bow and, play a solo using it.
That's right. And it gets a different tone, right? It's a little edgier.
Exactly.
Yeah. So great tonal effect, too, we get on that bowed bass. And then we get a 1-chorus drum solo before Lee comes back in with the head. Again, we're featuring everybody, including Philly Joe. There's a nice slow down ending here. Great harmony coloring from the horn section and the keys, where we hear them doing this sort of slow down ending with those final flourishings from the keys and Philly Joe's final statement on the drum set. Let's listen and check that out together. and that's all she wrote. That's how the album ends. Really nicely done, really classy ending, I would say, on Lazy Bird with that. All in all, that's the end of the album, and it says so much with only 5 tracks, but everyone's featured exceedingly well. I mean, Dwayne, what do you think about all this?
I mean, I think it says more than some 12 track albums that I've heard. I mean, it goes in so many directions and features so many different things, right? The playing, the soloing, the compositions, the melodies. It's just everyone gets featured, everything. There's so much to listen for. I mean, in 5 tracks, it's hard to find another album that's got 5 tracks and has so much to really wrap your head around.
That's true. I'm sure they're out there, and they're ones that you and I know and love, but off the top of my head, there's not one as iconic as this one from John Coltrane and the gang. I mean, it's really quite something to be able to realize that you can basically revisit this album any moment in your life, and you'll hear something maybe you didn't hear before, or you'll remember how great this album is, and how well, like you said, the players complement each other, and they're listening. It's well rehearsed, but that doesn't mean it's over practiced, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference, and they're still providing music to us on this album. How long ago? What are we, 70 years later or something? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I think this album, I mean, it just feels timeless. Like, it feels like it's iconic, in the past 70 years, and it just continued to be that way moving forward. Like, I don't see this being an album that ever gets forgotten. It's just going to live in jazz history forever, and it's with good reason. I mean, it's one that Max said, just keep revisiting it. Like, I don't think it's ever a bad idea to be like, I'm feeling a little uninspired, what should I listen to? Go listen to Blue Train. I mean, there's lots to listen for here. You'll get something from it for sure.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. All right, well, that's it. I mean, that's 5 tracks. It's not, there's no more music to talk about. It's sweet, short, simple. Not always simple, but I mean, it's great. And let's get into let's talk about our top 3s and our not so hots. There's not much to choose from. So, Max, you want to go first, or you want to go second on this?
I'll go first. As listeners know, we always do a top 3 and a not so hot track. We each agree on some and may disagree on others, but my top 3 are almost, I guess, in order of the track listing on the album. So first, I love Blue Train. I think that's probably the dead giveaway of what should be somebody's number 1 track on the album. The way each player performs during the double time feel, the melody, the eeriness of it, the way they mix and match the minor, almost minor sound with the major blues. And it's just one everybody has heard before, more than likely. And then we get my number 2, which is Moment's Notice. Great chord changes, great playing from Train. And my number 3 is Locomotion. I think Locomotion is one of those tunes that blends blues with more, we'll say more complicated in quotes, compositions, but it's not super complicated. We just add an 8-bar bridge with some chromatic movement in those dominant 7th chords, but there's a lot there. And that's a reminder that there's so much in blues that lays as a foundation to what we call jazz, that it's really never going to get old, in my opinion. And so the way Locomotion is composed, and the way Train sort of creates a melody over some of the form, but not over other parts of the form. So it lends itself to that freedom aspect that I love in jazz, where we're a little bit more free at times to improvise and say what we want to say within a given context. And Train isn't sort of being very rigid here with what he wants. He has an 8-bar melody, but other than that, it's free blowing, and we want to listen to each other and engage with each other musically, and let's see what we can create. And that's something that's at times missing from more modern ways of playing. And so Locomotion is a reminder of what you can do with the blues and what you can do if you're listening to each other and giving yourself room to create.
Yeah, I think that's all super well put. And Locomotion is, it's just such an awesome track. And it's one that, like, might, with your first two in the top two might be easy to kind of forget how great it is. But
Yeah.
such a cool track.
And then my not so hot, there isn't one really on this album, but you got to go with one. And so I'm going with Lazy Bird for the simple fact that there are moments of that melody I'm not a huge fan of. Otherwise, it's great playing. And I think it's safe to say that there's not a bad track on this album.
Yeah, I totally agree. So for my top three, I had the same first two as Max. I said Blue Train is my number one. I think there's really just no question. It's so iconic. Everyone's heard the track. It just is exactly what this album is. You know, Blue Train, it's the name of the album, the title track, and it's the playing is all so awesome. Yeah, just no question. Blue Train's number one for me. Two is Moment's Notice as well. Just such a unique, cool track. Gives us like that early insight into Train's like composing and where things are going. So I love Moment's Notice for that reason. And then I went a little bit of a different direction with my third track on my top three. I was really in between Locomotion and then the track that I picked, which is I'm Old Fashioned. And I was really struggling, like which one. And I think I'm Old Fashioned just, it really speaks to me in a certain amount of ways. The playing on it is awesome. It might not be quite as, driving and, there's a lot going on in Locomotion, but I just really like some of the things that it says. And I like the approach that they take on I'm Old Fashioned. I think it's like the perfect ballad for this, in this setting and for this album. I think they've picked it so well. And just, we get Train's playing at the top and him playing the melody, and I think that his playing is just so awesome on ballads. But then everyone else that gets featured and Lee taking it out with the melody at the end is something I didn't expect, and I think it's such an awesome feature. So I went with I'm Old Fashioned just for a few of those reasons. And like Max said, for the not so hot, I think on this one, I was thinking about telling Max, like, hey, let's just not pick one for this. It kind of feels disrespectful. But for my not so hot, I picked Lazy Bird. That just doesn't seem right. It's a fantastic track. I like the melody on it. I know Max, and I can see where he's coming from with that, but I just kind of like the simplicity of the melody over the changes there. So yeah.
Yeah. Here's why I say that. It's because I have learned that head before, but I almost immediately forget it. And that's just something I got to work on, right? It's like a few of Train's heads are not as ingrained in me as they should be. And when people play Lazy Bird, I'm just sort of dumbfounded because it's like I just can't get over it that I can't seem to remember it when I'm learning it, and I just got to play it more and work on it. That's just like one of the melody. That's the only melody here where that sort of thing is happening with me from this album. It's just some of that melody. It either seems unfinished, or I would change a thing or two, or I just got to really dig in on that one.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I see where you're coming from. I think it's probably, the other four melodies on the album maybe stand out more, but I think it's still a great melody in my opinion. But let's get into our overall album thoughts and our ratings, which is something we like to do. We give our kind of synopsis and our rating to every album. I'll go ahead and go first, and we'll let Max go second on this one. I think that Blue Train by John Coltrane is an iconic recording that reaches beyond the boundaries of jazz. The album is truly a jazz masterpiece and a unique lightning strike in time. Coltrane combines forces with Blue Note for the only time in his career, and what we get is a hard bop recording that will stand toe-to-toe with any other in history. It is clear the amount of thought that went into this recording and how well thought out the compositions were. The musicians that Coltrane recruited to make this vision come true could not have been more perfect for the task. They bring great energy and impeccable playing to every single track. It speaks volumes that 4 of the 5 tracks on the album are original Train compositions and have nearly all become standards at this point. The curation of the album is brilliant in every single way. The first track, Blue Train, is also the title track, and yep, you guessed it, the most famous recording on the album. Blue Train opens up with an absolute bang and refuses to let up even an inch. Then we get a true feel for what's to come in Coltrane's compositional techniques with the unique movement in Moment's Notice. Lee Morgan shows again that he is more than prepared to stand and trade blows with Train throughout the entire session. It feels like they are pushing each other to greatness with the solo sections. Locomotion drives us forward with intensity that is unmatched. The rhythm section is locked and loaded, and I challenge you to find a nanosecond that they leave the pocket. Doesn't exist. I'm Old-Fashioned is a beautiful and tender insight into Train's ballad playing, which features other players on the album to perfection. Train's playing on the album is not near perfection, it's impeccable. It's playing like this in the albums that come shortly after with Atlantic and Impulse Records that leads him to be considered on the short list of greatest saxophone players of all time. The album is unique, easy listening, fun, and it's so musical. It's one of the greatest recordings in the Blue Note catalog and in jazz history. Listen to it and then go listen to it again and again and again. Nothing more. It's a 9.7 out of 10 for me. One of the greatest albums of all time, in my opinion.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to really disagree with that. I have similar thoughts. I think, Coltrane's only Blue Note album as a leader, Blue Train, will continue to be heralded as a masterpiece. The compositions, the solos, the arrangements on this record are timeless and legendary. Train's playing on this record is practically flawless, I would say, while the album effectively features his supporting cast too, and we've been talking about that. Trumpeter Lee Morgan does well on those melodies to I'm Old-Fashioned and Lazy Bird, while providing stellar lines and an impeccable display of time and feel during every solo. Trombonist Curtis Fuller is rhythmically interesting to listen to, while many of his improvisations and his lines and ideas fit right in line with the mood of this record. Kenny Drew's lines on the piano are also ear-catching in addition to his awesome comping. Paul Chambers is one of those bass players you don't have to worry about. His ability to assert the time, provide momentum to any tune is noticed and appreciated. Paul's typical trick out of the bag use of the bow during his bass solos is displayed here too on Moment's Notice and Lazy Bird. The icing on the cake for me is drummer Philly Joe Jones. I really dig his hint of the double time feel on the title track during those horn solos. And he also provides great solo choruses when it's his time to shine on the tune Locomotion and the tune Lazy Bird. This record opens with the almost eerie melody that defines the tune Blue Train, incorporating the use of that sharp 9 on those dominant 7th harmonies while solos occur over the predictable 12-bar blues form. Philly Joe delivers great accompaniment, implying that quasi-double time feel in the middle of each horn solo we've been talking about that I mentioned earlier. I also think Curtis Fuller delivers an awesome statement with his bone solo. Train's solo on the opener is another high point to the album due to its catchiness and intense movement, while it consistently focuses ideas around the 9 and the 6 of the key center. Moment's Notice has a melody and chord structure that implies the direction where Train is headed with his music after the release of this very record. It's a catchy melody with more intricate changes that uses a 2-5-1 chord progression, moving chromatically. The intro-outro is another compositional technique used here that catches the ear. Train kills it again with his solo on it, while Lee Morgan takes a sec to really warm up as he really gets into it during his second chorus. On Locomotion, that tune is a 12-bar blues with an added 8-bar bridge. As part of the head, Train simply blows over the bridge without any designated melody. I would have enjoyed a written out head melody during that part of the form, but I also really dig the way he lets room for creativity during this tune Locomotion. The 8-bar break into the bone and trumpet solos is a nice arranging moment. It's also really cool to check out Philly Joe's one chorus drum solo, as he tends to keep the hi-hat on the beats 2 and 4 during most of it. That slow down, that retardado ending is also a nice touch to the song. I'm Old-Fashioned features Train on the head at the top, while Lee Morgan takes the melody towards the end of the track. This is a humbling arrangement, as Train is the ultimate leader on the hit, Yet he still has a wherewithal to feature other members of the recording in ways other leaders would not. Kenny Drew also works to bring out some blues in his solo, while Curtis Fuller throws in some serious quotes during his ride. Lazy Bird closes out the album yet again, featuring Lee Morgan on the melody. Parts of this melody also sounded unfinished to me. We do, however, get more great soloing from the crew. Curtis, Lee, and Train have got to be the most consistently great soloists of this Blue Note era. It's also appreciated that each member of the band gets a solo on the last track, Lazy Bird. It ends with colorful, elongated harmonies that paint the image of stair steps, bringing the album to its close. We've hit the final step of this elaborate staircase. Blue Train is Coltrane's first masterwork in his career. After its release, we get more great records like Giant Steps, My Favorite Things, A Love Supreme, and the list just goes on. Train showcases his impeccable technique, compositional and arranging abilities, and overall musicianship. It's hard to deny the greatness of this album. It's basically as close to perfect as possible. Blue Train is essential listening for every serious or even casual jazz listener. Fair warning, if you check out John Coltrane's solo on the opening track one too many times, it will get stuck in your head. Same goes for many of these melodies. Hats off to one of the essential Coltrane recordings and all-time Blue Note achievements. I give it a 9.5 out of 10.
Yeah, Max, and I think you hit every nail on the head there. You just took all the nails out of the box and one by one. I mean, I just love how Max goes into, like such great detail in his overall thoughts, and that's just something that some reviewers don't do, and that kind of bothers me sometimes. So I appreciate Max like laying it all out there and in the overall thoughts, and so that puts our overall Jazz Jam score at a 9.6 out of 10. If you want to, listeners, let us know what you would rate this album. We'd love to hear that from you. What do you give this out of 10? Are you giving it high nines, or do you have problems with it? I don't know what problems you have. I might need you to get checked out. I don't know. Some people like different things, but this one's hard to deny. So yeah, our score on this one is 9.6 out of 10. I think that's a great score for it. And just an awesome listen, man. I mean, it's just like, it's one that I wanted to listen to over, because when we do this, we're listening. I think I've listened to this album 15 to 20 times now in the past month. So, and it's one that I just wanted to keep listening to. I went on a walk the other day, and I was like, okay, let me just put it in, and I'm just going to listen through it. And I listened to it once, and I was like, I'm just going to listen again. And I just turned it back on, and I listened to it again. It was like, oh, no, I want to listen to that again, So, and I played I'm Old Fashioned. I'm like, let me just play that track again. I'm like, so it's that kind of album that you just want to keep playing, and just truly, truly awesome. And I'm honored that we get to talk about it on the podcast and people want to listen to that.
Yeah, this is one that I was always pretty sure that we were going to get to eventually. So, there's a lot in there, but it's one of those essential albums you really got to check out and listen for yourself and engage with. And it takes time sometimes, like you said, you were listening to it over and over again. That may be because there's so much to listen for. It's going to take some time to get through it and really focus in. And there's other moments that you can sort of casually listen to. And there's others where you really just want to dig in and ignore everything else going on and focus in on what's going on this album, musically speaking. Because there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of emotion, and you get a sense that we've said this about other albums and other players, but they each have something to say. They've been affected, and if you think about the context of when this album was released, there's a lot to be affected by. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And that goes back to that video that we were talking about with our recommendation, trying to get a context of what's going on at the time. So definitely go check out that video that's linked in the description and kind of get more of an idea of, jazz at the time and the history and some of these players, what they're going through. But yeah, before we close out the album, I just want to say, if you like what we're doing, please go like and rate us, and go subscribe to us on YouTube. Check out some of our content there. It's really cool. We do reaction videos. We have a interview that we did with Braxton Cook. It's we have it as a podcast episode where you can listen to it, but we also have the video where you can go and actually watch that interview that we did with Braxton. So definitely that's really cool. Go check that out. And we have a website that's really cool. It's kind of like got all of our thoughts. If you want to just read our overall thoughts, if you don't get that far in the podcast or you don't want to fully check out a certain episode, we understand that. It's a lot of listening, to listen to every episode. So if there's an album that you're thinking about getting into and you want to just get an idea of what it's about, go check out our website and click on that album and read our thoughts on it and see our rating. That's a great tool as well. And we have our power rankings list, which is one of my favorite things about this podcast, is that power rankings list. So we take all of the albums that we've ranked and we put them into a master list, and they're all ranked by what score we've given them from top to bottom. So definitely go check out that list as well. I think that's a really cool thing. And then also another thing, which is linked in the description, is our top 3 tracks playlist, where we take every single one of the top 3 tracks from every album we've ever done that Max and I pick, and they're on a playlist. So if you want a playlist full of killer jazz, just go listen to that top 3. I mean, there's so much music in there by this point. So definitely go check out that playlist. It's got so much good music and so much stuff that we've done on the podcast. But yeah, I just want to thank everyone so much for listening. Thanks for giving us, a platform to talk about this music. We love it so much, and we're glad that people want to share the love for jazz music with us. And I think this is an album that really encapsulates that. So yeah, thanks everyone. Max, any final thoughts before we close out the episode?
Not really. I just appreciate anybody that is listening to us and is engaging with the music we're talking about. If you have some things to say, some albums to suggest, if you yourself are more or less a top artist in this industry, we did that interview with Braxton Cook. I'm still sort of smiley from that experience.
It doesn't seem real, yeah.
All right. I mean, that was really cool. So we want to do some more of that. There have been some people that have reached out to us. We will get back to you, one way or another. There's been some engagement, so we hope there's more to come, and keep listening.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Well, we look forward to our next episode is that album that we talked to Braxton about, his most recent album, Who Are You When No One Is Watching. It's a really, really cool album. Does a great job of mixing jazz and kind of R&B, and is a really great insight into Braxton's life. So I hope you guys will join us for that one. But this has been our episode on John Coltrane's Blue Train, and I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Jazz Jam Podcast.